Welcome back to 24 News. I'm David Matlin, live in Tel Aviv. We bring you the top stories from in and around Israel and connected to us this hour. We begin out of Yemen, as reports have been confirmed that the Israel Defense Force has begun another round of strategic precision strikes on Houthi infrastructure and weapons there in Yemen. Now, 4 times this past week, millions of people in Israel were sent rushing to shelter in the middle of the night. That's as Yemen's fanatical Houthi regime fired large ballistic missiles into central Israel, the potential fallout affecting large areas. Now, some have been intercepted by Israel's defenses. Some have struck. Now, in one case, leveling an entire school building in Ramat Gan, just outside Tel Aviv. In another, cratering a children's playground in Jaffa. These weapons are no joke. Unfortunately, both of those hits occurred in the dead of night. No children present this time. But the attempted terror of the Houthis is now facing the ramped up and newly available resources of the Israeli defense establishment, which is where we see the images coming out of Yemen right now. But we have in the studio with us our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseret. Getting into the latest, Ariel, this news of the strike here in Yemen, the IDF again sending what we believe to be fighter jets into the skies of Yemen to carry out these precision strikes, took over the top of our broadcast here this hour. Again, all eyes on this issue, highly disruptive in Israel over the last week, just the last week, with these missiles coming in the middle of the nights. And other times. What do we know at this point? What are the Israelis and what are the Houthis saying?
Right, David. So not officially, but Israeli sources are confirming that Israel has begun striking in Yemen. These are targets in the international airport in Sana'a, in the capital, as well as in the port city of Hodeidah. They're saying that they're targeting critical and strategic infrastructure belonging to the Houthis. They're adding that dozens of Israeli fighter jets are participating in these strikes, with Yemeni media saying that the second wave is currently underway. Now, interestingly, this is coinciding with a speech by the Houthi leader Abdel Malek al-Houthi. These are, albeit a pre-recorded speech, as usually happens, but in his speech he did mention Israeli strikes on the Houthis, some excerpts. Israel's deterrence has failed against our country despite aggressive raids at targeted civilian facilities in Sana'a and Hodeidah. The aggression on our country will not deter us from continuing to support the Palestinian people. No matter the pressures and temptations, Yemen will not stop its operations. That's on the part of the Houthi leader. As for the Israeli security sources, they're saying that the Houthis have opened the gates of hell on themselves. Our goal is to hurt them harder than ever before.
Look, we've seen other groups in the region tie their fate to what's happening in Gaza. It was the big line of Hassan Nasrallah, former leader of Hezbollah. Other proxy militias, Iran, for example. The Houthis haven't come down from this tree. They're still standing strong against, we're doing this in solidarity with Gaza. This is their whole frontal talking point?
Yeah, the Houthis have emerged as the last remaining significant proxy that Iran has in its arsenal. They're not only are they the only ones left, but they've actually ramped up their strikes against Israel in recent weeks. Now, if at the beginning of the war, the main front was the southern Gaza border communities, and then it shifted to the northern communities. Now the main front in Israel is central Israel, is Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is the new Sderot, it's the new Kiryat Shmona, and this is the reality that, as far as the Houthis are concerned, this is the most cost-effective front they have, and not just for them, but for all of Iran's proxies, because all it takes is one ballistic missile that they launch. They tend to do it in the middle of the night to send millions of Israelis to the shelter. And even if whether it hits or is intercepted, that is not the point. The fact that they can continue to inflict this indiscriminate terror on Israelis at will, this is something that has Israeli leaders wondering what can they do in order to stop these attacks. This latest round of strikes on the Houthis, as significant as it may be, is still ongoing, but at least according to the statements of the Houthis, this is not what's going to stop them from continuing to attack Israel.
You mentioned the millions of us disrupted from our sleep. I think it was the last one was at 4 in the morning. There was another one at 2 in the morning, hustling our children, pregnant wives, whatever may be in the middle of the night into the shelters. Nothing new for Israelis, unfortunately, though this has been the theme of this week with the Houthis. So yes, it's a huge aggression. They're trying to terrorize us. But the IDF is in a different situation than they were even a month ago. And we see the Houthis ramping up their attacks. But the Israeli Defense Establishment establishment has largely wrapped up their operations in Lebanon. The Gaza Strip is a small-scale affair at this point. We know their eyes on Syria, but are there a lot of resources now, essentially, through the Israeli defense establishment that are essentially freed up to be deployed on Yemen? Do we expect to see more IDF activity towards Yemen? What's the next chapter look like?
Well, Israel's activity against Yemen is basically limited to air activity and intelligence. And so most of the ground forces that have been freed up with the scaling down of the war in Gaza and the ceasefire ongoing in Lebanon, that won't really affect Israel's capacity to target Houthi installations in Yemen because it is nearly 2,000 kilometers away. Israel's not planning to send ground forces into there, at least not in the immediate future. So what Israel can do is limited to air activity and intelligence. Obviously, Israel has ramped up its air activity, but this is a considerably new kind of target, new missions that Israeli Air Force pilots are undergoing. Not that they haven't done anything like this, but this is something that they're getting more accustomed to, and the more strikes like this we see, the more experienced they will get, obviously.
I don't have the statistics, the most updated statistics in front of me, but I know a lot of Red Sea shipping, international shipping, has been highly disrupted, diverted in many cases from these routes now going towards the Suez Canal. This impacts a lot of industry around the world. There's an international coalition that the U.S. built of naval forces, air forces that are in this area, that are ostensibly there to clamp down and stop this all from happening. What do we know about their activities, or what this coalition led by the U.S. is or is not doing right now against the Houthis?
Yeah, I think calling this an international coalition kind of gives it a bigger stance than what would seem. We're talking about a coalition of the U.S. Air Force and Navy and British Air Forces and Navy. It's
right.
Pretty much that's what it comes down to. And so they have increased their attacks against Houthis, but they're seen as a more defensive capacity.
I see the term whack-a-mole being used a lot for the way, say, the U.S. destroyers are deployed off the coast, playing defense to a large degree. We haven't seen these kind of strikes from much of this international coalition yet, like what Israel's doing. Exactly.
And what is interesting, later in the broadcast, in Middle East Now and in the rundown, we will show an interview that I had with the former spokesperson of the Houthis, and he said that anything short of a widespread international coalition, not just the U.S. and UK, but Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, that they were engaged against the Houthis, but they were told to stop, pressure to stop by the U.S. and UK for humanitarian reasons.
Massive pressure by Biden and the Democrats in the beginning of Biden's term. This was the big devil was Saudi Arabia and what they were doing in Yemen.
And the Houthis were removed from the terror list.
Right.
So anything short of reestablishing this coalition of Arab forces, U.S., British forces, and Israeli forces, anything short of that is not going to be able to do the trick. But that is not the core. The core is for that coalition to support Yemeni forces who oppose the Houthi regime on the ground in Yemen.
What do we know about those forces that are opposed to the Houthis? We don't hear about them much. What's their status?
We don't hear about them a lot, but in fact, in recent days, there has been an escalation in the fighting between the pro-Saudi government in southern Yemen, based out of Aden. They have not only withstood Houthi attempts to encroach on their territory, mainly for oil interests, but not only have they withstood these attacks, but they're actually a counteroffensive, very successful. Over 10, 15 Houthis killed in these strikes. According to the former Houthi spokesperson, that is the key. You cannot beat the Houthis without an offensive on the ground. They don't need any other forces on the ground except the Yemeni government forces, but they need significant air support from all interested parties involved. And as you mentioned, this is not only an Israeli problem and not just a regional problem, but a global issue.
Absolutely.
And it needs to be addressed as such.
One other thing to throw at you here, we do have other stories to get to, but look, we're hearing some in the Israeli political echelon say, look, ramped up coordination with the U.S., and we have President Trump coming in. This could be a whole new approach to the problems with Yemen, but also that the issue lies in Tehran, not Iran, that we should be going after, the Israelis, should be going after the regime in Iran for Houthi actions. This is an important part of the picture as well, these two areas of pressure to coordinate, to ramp up the U.S. and to go after Iran?
Look, the Houthis do operate on their own, but they are part of a proxy program run by Iran, and so you cannot tackle the Houthis on their own. We're hearing, at least according to Israeli media reports, that Mossad Chief Dedi Barnea said Israel should not be focusing on targeting the Houthis because it will take too long to solve that problem, but should go directly to the head of the octopus, Iran. To my understanding, there are deliberations on that as to how advanced those talks are regarding a strike prior to Trump entering the White House on January 20th or after. I cannot put that on the timeline. It is being discussed, but aside from talks, actions are currently underway in Yemen.
They are at this hour. That's again, we start the program. Ariel, stay with us. More to get to. We will come back to the events unfolding as we speak in Yemen. Again, why we jumped on air this hour to tackle that story. But again, this hour we also have to focus on the day's developments in the Gaza Strip. That's where the Israel Defense Force continues to pursue Palestinian terrorists and seek any leads to the nearly 100 Israelis still being held, both dead and alive, as hostages in the enclave. Now, an Israeli Special Forces officer was killed by a sniper in the Central Strip while leading counter-terror ops in his troops. He's 35-year-old reservist Amit Levy. He leaves a wife and 4 children behind. And the IDF also successfully destroyed a 2-kilometer-long tunnel in the northern strip, astoundingly still there and active. This is where they say terror operatives had based themselves for long periods of time. Just destroyed today. It's a complicated operation going after those tunnels. Also, today an Israeli airstrike killed 5 people in Gaza that the Palestinians claim were journalists. But the Israeli Defense Establishment says they were known Islamic Jihad operatives that were trying to evade the Israelis as a press team. So a lot more to discuss there again with our correspondent, Ariel Osserman, in the studio, looking at Gaza. Look, how do we describe what's taking place? There's fighting ongoing. It's relatively small scale at this point, but operations appear to be happening from north to south across the entire strip still, counter-terror operations.
Not only that, but last night there was an airstrike that in central Gaza in Nuseirat on a press vehicle belonging to El Quds Today News. Palestinians were quick to say Israel once again targeting journalists, but the IDF saying and naming all 5 members who were in that car as not only journalists, but also active members in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Highlighting the deep intelligence and know-how of what's happening, saying, hey, we're not just shooting at anybody here. This is who is in this car. This is what they've been up to. So it was I felt like it was a credentialed move by the IDF here to say, hey, look, we know who's in this car.
Yeah, and to share their names, that is very important to give more clout to these claims because, you know, a lot of times they're being dismissed. But Israel is continuously advancing its ground operation in Gaza. Look, we've talked about this already at the beginning of the broadcast. It has been scaled back. We're not talking about a widespread maneuver, but given the deep penetration of Israeli forces in Gaza. They've been there for a while. This has mainly assisted Israel in gathering intelligence and launching these pinpoint operations in various areas across the Gaza Strip. Obviously, there's the limitation of 100 hostages being hidden across the Gaza Strip. Israel has acknowledged that it knows where some of those hostages are being held, and so that limits its ability to operate wherever it would like. But this does not mean that the threat of Hamas is gone. Their military apparatus is no longer existent as a semi-army, but their guerrilla warfare is ongoing. They have managed to recruit thousands of new fighters, and they do so on a constant basis. The flow of humanitarian aid, which is their main source of income, is continuously entering the Gaza Strip, and so there isn't really...
Weapons smuggling was stopped this week as well. Coming across from Egypt, there was some stash of weapons as well the IDF intercepted. In other words, there's still efforts to rearm in Gaza?
There are, obviously not at the same capacity as it was before the war. This also highlights sensitivity in Israeli cooperation with the Egyptians. That forces that I talked to on the ground operating in Gaza say could be a lot better. Okay. And it also highlights the challenges moving forward the day after in the Gaza Strip. But we cannot fail to acknowledge that once again, in the absence of a political alternative for Hamas ruling Gaza in the day after the war, Hamas will stay there and eventually they'll be able to rebuild.
Certainly a lot more to say on all of this. Again, Ariel, stay with us, or jumping out now, or moving towards this sort of central issue that we touch on when we're talking about Gaza here that's really dictated the entire war effort there. And reports now indicating that intensive diplomacy and even indirect negotiations are still underway this week, aimed at securing the release from Gaza of these remaining Israeli hostages and achieving some sort of pause in the fighting, likely the release of a batch of Palestinian security prisoners being held in Israel. But the latest reported developments claim that Hamas has refused to not only provide any information on the condition of these people being held for over a year in their dungeons, but they refuse now, even in the stage of talks, to even tell us which hostages are still alive. And that's where we sit now. We go to our correspondent, Balir Saladin. He's in Tel Aviv at so-called Hostage Square. It's been an epicenter for the outpouring of emotions and public sentiment here. Look, Balir, how has that place where you are there, this issue, been infused with some sort of new energy, dare I say, this week specifically, as there have been so many reports about progress, if that could be called that?
Yes, we had some reports about progress being made, and also the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, a couple of days ago said the same thing in the Knesset in his speech. But we're also witnessing some sort of new challenges for these negotiations. We've heard the statements from Hamas yesterday, and also afterwards the Prime Minister's office issued a statement about the delays of these negotiations of reaching that hostage deal. And today also Hamas, again, by one of their senior officials are saying that the demand by Israel to provide them with the list of hostages, we cannot do that, not because we don't want to, not because we're refusing. We are actually, Hamas is saying, can't actually reach those hostages, and that's why we are not able to provide that list, because of the war, because of the security situation in Gaza. That's what they are saying, that they need the ceasefire to begin, and then and only then they can reach out to all the other fractions in the Gaza Strip that hold hostages and ask about the situation of the hostages that are not within Hamas's hands. That's something that Israel is considering, apparently. But of course, Israel cannot trust that Hamas, in case there is a ceasefire deal and already signed a ceasefire deal with Hamas, will they ever provide the information they needed? Maybe they will come up with new excuses, and that's why, understandably, of course, they cannot trust them. Now, here at Hostages Square, this is the second day of the Hanukkah and the lighting of the candles. Also in parallel to that, at the president's resident in Jerusalem, there is also another event for the second day of Hanukkah with the families of the hostages, hoping for the release of the hostages. We've heard also the president yesterday saying that the hostages doesn't have enough time and they should be brought back to Israel as soon as possible. And that's why the families of the hostages are, according to the statement that they have issued today, planning or threatening at least to submit a petition to the High Court in Israel, which is not very far away. It's actually in Jerusalem. We are close to another court in Tel Aviv here. But in any way, they're planning to submit a petition to the High Court in Israel, claiming that Israeli government is actually violating the rights of the hostages, because every Israeli citizen has a right of life, of course, and has a right to live in dignity. And Israel, by not, or the Israeli government, but by not bringing them back as soon as possible, they are violating their right. That's the threat. Of course, I'm not sure whether, in terms of how successful could that be, I'm not sure about that. But of course, Israeli government doesn't want to be in that situation where they will need to confront in this way the families of the hostages.
But Leah, thanks for updates as always, coming to us again from Hostage Square. As you mentioned, a deeply painful, deeply dividing issue, divisive issue even inside Israel here. This is one of the key cards still in the hands of our enemies there. And along those lines, we're joined now by Dr. David Shimoni, former intelligence official and from Commanders for Israel's Security. Look, on the issue of the hostages here, clearly, look, when you look at the groups in Gaza, at least, those who took these hostages, the leverage that they used to have, their territory has been taken away or reduced. Their armaments have been destroyed or greatly reduced. They're still holding these hostages. This seems to be their last card in play, their last great leverage, and they know, clearly, they know the pain that inflicts on Israeli society, the divisive nature of this issue, how powerful it is. I'm left questioning, why would they release hostages? What would motivate them to give up that card, that last real leverage they have, that painful lever that they're holding over Israeli society? Why would they release people?
Well, I think the main purpose that they have is to stop the war and to gain some days of ceasefire and silence. And so that's the big debate between a full deal or a partial deal, but because they are pushing for something that eventually will end the war. That's what's bothering them.
And keep them in power.
Keep them,
right.
First of all, keep them alive.
Right.
Those who survived all these months of bombardment and incursions and all that, and conflict and fighting, they're still there, and they're still fighting for their lives. But they want to, and again, nobody replaced Hamas in Gaza. That's our big fault, our big mistake. But for the time being, if the war ends and they remain there when no other force is taking over Gaza, then they have a big achievement.
Look, along those lines, we've seen a couple factors to throw at you here. We've seen the Palestinian Authority suddenly flexing muscles in parts of the West Bank that they haven't in years, arguably, whether it be Jenin this week, taking on some of the armed groups there, trying to show that they're a power broker in the region again, perhaps. Maybe this has to do with Gaza, sowing the seeds that, hey, we can do this, we can take over in Gaza. I want to hear your thoughts on that. But also the incoming U.S. President Trump. There's been a lot of pressure and action, truly, under the Biden administration to keep the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. In the beginning of the war, just barely over a year ago, it was Biden himself saying, there wouldn't be any aid going in if it got hijacked, there wouldn't be any fuel, all these things that have evaporated and now flow freely into the Gaza Strip and are hijacked by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. Is there a sense that President Trump could clamp down on that, could say we're not sending any more humanitarian aid? And he's used tough language on Gaza. So maybe is that a factor, perhaps, for those in Gaza? What are your thoughts on that? What are the future hold for this issue?
We don't know the future about Trump because he hasn't yet announced his exact intentions with regard to Gaza. But he is concerned about the American hostages above anything else, and he's using threatening words and statements, saying that we should all clear the mess before January 20th. And I believe that if nothing happens until January 20th, we'll see some harsh movements by President Trump and by the United States. But again, his priority is first to get out the American hostages. When you're talking about the Palestinian Authority, I think they are also trying to regroup and reorganize towards the new president of the United States. If you remember, January 2020, there's a vision, a document by President Trump and by the White House that has a function for the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and in Gaza. But they have to clean up their own mess.
A lot. And we'll get into more of this. Dr. Shimoni, stay with us here. I want to bring in another story before we head out to break. Now, as each year passes, more survivors of the Holocaust, they're inevitably passing away. Those living witnesses to the horrors of Europe. They were a young age when those atrocities took place. But here's one other story from Marjorie Brown.
Someone who is 9, 10, 12 years old remembers. But for me, it's all flashes. And as nobody talked about it, I didn't talk about it either.
Evelyn Askelovich was born in Amsterdam in 1938 to German parents who fled their homeland after the rise in Nazism. However, the Nazis conquered the Netherlands in 1940, and after 3 years of hiding, a neighbour gave them up to the authorities, and she, along with her parents, were sent to Vught and Westerbork camps in the Netherlands before being sent back to Germany and to the infamous Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
When I was little, between the ages of 4 and 6, when things were too complicated, too hard, I had the ability to put myself in a bubble and not be there anymore. In the first camp, after I'd had all the illnesses, after I'd really nearly died, because Vught was a camp where children died of hunger, misery, and disease, I stopped being there. I was in a bubble of misery.
After 2.5 years of moving around camps and suffering from diseases such as measles and chickenpox, which the doctors thought would kill her, Evelyn and her parents were liberated by the Red Cross. But because of her young age, she doesn't remember a lot of what happened during those years, and it was often considered a taboo subject, both at home and among her peers. However, in 2012, almost 70 years after her liberation, she saw a familiar name on a Nazi document collected by the Red Cross, at which point the horrors that she was a part of had sunk in.
There was my name, Evelyn Sulzbach, not the daughter of, my name on individual cards, Vocht, Westerbork, Bergen-Belsen, on lists and individual cards. And suddenly it became reality when I saw my name printed on them. It wasn't just that my parents' daughter had been in the camps. I'd been there. And so it became. It wasn't 2012. It became a reality, that it was true.
After this, and with the rise in anti-Semitic attacks in Western Europe, Evelyn decided to make her story known. Alongside her son, the French journalist Claude Askolovitch, she wrote a book detailing her horrors in 2023. And to this day, she is still visiting schools and speaking at public events to tell her story and keep the memories of those awful years alive.
I decided in 2015 that as part of the very, very last generation, that I had to tell. And so now I tell the story. I go around schools in France and I only talk about the role of the Netherlands, which is a terrible role, because 75% of the Jews in the Netherlands didn't come back. It's the mirror of France, and I tell the story. They listen to me. I receive messages afterward. So I tell myself that somewhere, I hope I leave a trace, that it may have existed, and that it did exist.
Of issues bring you here. We're stepping out for a short break, though, on I-24 News. Stay with us. We'll be back with much more on the latest strikes in Yemen, targeting the Houthis. Also, a week of their ballistic missiles raining down on us here in central Israel. So stay with us. That and more coming up. Again, short break here on I-24 News.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to I-24 News. Thanks for staying with us. Still coming to you live from Tel Aviv. I'm David Matlin as we stay on the top news of the hour. And this time, it's coming out of Yemen. As the IDF confirmed they've begun another round of strategic precision strikes on Houthi infrastructure and weapons. Now, this is significant. 4 times this past week, millions of people in Israel were sent rushing to shelter in the middle of the night. This is all as Yemen's fanatical Houthi regime fired large ballistic missiles into central Israel, with their potential fallout even being intercepted, affecting large areas of the country. Now, some have been intercepted by Israeli defenses, but some have struck. One case, a missile leveled an entire school building in Ramat Gan near Tel Aviv. Another cratered a children's playground in Jaffa. These are the quote-unquote strategic targets the Houthis have been hitting. Now, fortunately, both of those hits were in the dead of night, no children present. But the attempted terror of the Houthis now is facing the ramped-up available resources of the Israel defense establishment. We have much more to discuss around that. Again, we'll bring you any updates. Again, strikes ongoing, as we hear right now in Yemen by the IDF. So we're joined still in the studio by Dr. David Shimoni, former intelligence official, and with commanders for Israel's security on the Houthi issue here now. Look, what do you expect to see next from Israel, the incoming U.S. administration, in terms of the Houthis? We've heard some talk about going after their leaders, targeted assassinations. What do you expect to see next?
Well, first of all, I'll say what we're seeing now. We're seeing now attacks by the Israeli Air Force on obvious targets, infrastructure, airports, seaports, energy, things that the intelligence gathering for them is quite easy. It's everybody knows where these facilities are.
Does it all hinge on intelligence, essentially? Is this, largely, does all the attacks, does it hinge on what intelligence Israel has?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I believe there's a lot of work being done. And again, bear in mind, also militarily and also intelligence-wise, that the Israeli security forces are now more free to deal with Yemen. They don't have an immediate threat from Lebanon or Syria or Gaza. So a lot of intelligence now is being directed, intelligence gathering at Yemen. And we have our satellites and we have our listening devices and, of course, human sources and hopefully people going in there and taking a look of, because eventually if you want to stop these attacks, you should hit very, very specific targets, the leaders, commanders, secret facilities that the Houthis have all over Yemen. So I believe we'll see more attempts to do this. This will be much less dramatic than what we see now with over 100 Israeli aircraft in the air. By the way, some of them are still in the air, and we're praying that they all come back safely. But I think it will lead, if possible, to target specific people and specific very, very, very narrow targets in Yemen to try to cripple their ability to fire at us.
I want to just highlight a couple points from a statement that emerged from Houthi leadership here. This is before the latest strikes now, but I guess some of the highlights being the Houthis are saying that their operations have, quote unquote, broken Israel's defensive superiority, that Yemen will continue its operations despite the pressures, that Israeli deterrence has failed despite raids targeting Sana'a and Hodeidah, and again, that they will continue to support the Palestinian people in their fight. So these are the main points that emerged from the Houthi leader just, I think, today in a pre-recorded statement, but this outlines their position, that they've hitched their fate to the Gaza Strip, to whatever else is happening. Look, we saw Iraqi Shiite militias this last week under the guidance of the prime minister there essentially say they're ending their hostilities against Israel. Maybe that's what they wanted to do or not, but they've stood down from this fight in support of anything else going on around here. It appears that this Houthi group in Yemen may be the last or at least most potent proxy left for Iran in the region right now. How important of a piece of that apparatus is this for Iran? And like some Israeli politicians are saying, we need to focus on Iran, not the Houthis. What's your thought on that, on Iran's role with this standoff with the Houthis?
Iran is still the center. It's the brain. It's the one that's issuing some of the instructions and a lot of the weapons and ammunition. And definitely, Iran is the main issue here, not Yemen. But as you mentioned, there's an argument between the military intelligence and the Mossad. Who should we strike now, Yemen or Iran? And it's a good question.
It's an interesting debate. Yes.
Yeah. Again, we can cause extreme damage to Iran. They're much more vulnerable now after the collapse of Syria and the collapse of Hezbollah. There's almost no air defenses now in Iran, so I believe Iran is kind of holding itself and maybe even feeling under immense threat. And they allow the Houthis to continue with one rocket a day, one unmanned aircraft a day. As we know, terrible impact on Israel. Millions of people in the middle of the night go to the shelters, disrupting a lot of the everyday life of the Israelis. But we've seen that you can't end anything only by military force. And if the chief of those Houthis is talking about the war in Gaza, he has a point. Everything has to come to a halt. We have to end the war in Gaza. We have to end the tension with Lebanon. We have to make the agreement there more, first of all, enforced and solid. And we have to end the war. And if the war and the Houthis continue, then there's another question. The Houthis also, they did, I think, something that's a mistake, but they're threatening the world commerce.
Right.
And the
disrupting it.
Yeah, of course. And they are causing terrible financial damages to Egypt. And so they're not gaining a lot of friends during this. And the entire world is concerned about the commercial shipping in their region. So
historically, I mean, I bring that point about other players in the region here, because it leads us to wonder if Israel's maybe ramping up collaboration with the Saudis, but the Egyptians as well. I mean, formerly in previous decades deployed troops into Yemen. I mean, this is an arena where they've, sought to leverage and have influence for all those economic reasons. Sure. Are we likely to see a bit more collaboration with the Saudis, perhaps with the Egyptians, the Israelis now coming in the region, coming a bit more down on the Houthis here?
I think it also depends now on the incoming administration in the United States. We know that in previous attacks by Iran, we had cooperation from, I think the Egyptians and the Saudis never admitted supporting or cooperating with Israel, but they didn't interfere in our operations. They could have given warnings, they could have interfered with, intercepted, damage our efforts in the area. I believe the incoming administration will try to influence both Egypt and Saudi Arabia to cooperate with Israel, again, to strengthen this ally against Iran. And again, the war against the Houthis is a global war now. It's not only Israel.
Does it seem this is a sensible place, I won't use the word to start, but for Israel and perhaps allies to be working right now against, as you mentioned, this exposed infrastructure? It's the airport, it's the seaports. What we think, the places that they've been using to bring in these advanced Iranian arms. Again, the ballistic missiles they're shooting at the Tel Aviv area this last week, almost every day. They're not producing these in Yemen, as far as we understand. These are things they're smuggling in, that they're bringing in, they're being supplied. Excuse me. So to go after those supply routes, to try to choke off that's incoming weapons supplies, is this something we can do, essentially, at this point?
Not alone. Okay. Not alone. You need a blockade on the shores of Yemen. And we can't do that alone. We have a very cute Navy. It's good, it's modern, it's well equipped.
Protecting our coastline, right.
But it's quite small.
Not patrolling Yemen, right.
No, you need an international effort to do that.
Well, we'll stay tuned for that. For now, Dr. David Shimoni, thanks for being with us on all of this. We do pivot towards other issues facing us now, and begin with Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. He visited Jerusalem's Temple Mount in the morning today, and he prayed there. Well, that goes against the Islamic authorities' decree at the holy site, which outlaws any utterance of non-Islamic prayer. But Minister Ben-Gvir has made fairly regular visits to this flashpoint site, usually on holidays. And today explained, quote, "I went up this morning to the place of our holy temple to pray for the safety of our soldiers, the speedy return of the hostages, and total victory with the help of God," close quote. So again, that's Ben-Gvir himself. But again, the Prime Minister's office swiftly made a statement that the long-standing status quo there had not been changed. In other words, Jews are not allowed to pray there. The Prime Minister was quick to tell everyone. But we're joined by Samar Sinjalawi, Fatah activist and chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund. And honestly, Samar, one of my favorite guests on our show. Thanks for being with us, Samar. Always eye-opening conversations with you, so appreciate your time. Look, I want to jump to sort of big scale question for you right now. Do you carry, there's a lot happening right now, whether it be what's happening in the Gaza Strip, all the issues in Israeli politics. Do you carry any optimism right now for how we can all emerge from this heightened conflict? It's been focused on Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, but is there a better tomorrow waiting for us both?
Definitely. And I'm so confident. I'm so confident because I know very well the Israelis and I know very well the Palestinians. The majority, the mainstream of the Israeli people and the majority and the mainstream of the Palestinian people by nature, they are capable to coexist and they would like to have an exit to this conflict. Well, maybe they are a little bit confused now because of the circumstances and because of the very bad leadership that is brainwashing or confusing their minds, making a lot of uncertainty among the way that the people are thinking. But if you leave Israelis and Palestinians to their naturality, they are capable to coexist and they are capable to go into a political horizons that will satisfy both Israelis and Palestinians. Whatever is happening in the world, in this war, all the fronts of it, by the end of the day, when it will end, we will discover that again, we are left to be 50% Israeli Jews and 50% Palestinians who are living in the same piece of land. Nothing has changed. And the only way to go out of this suffering, this grief, both sides are definitely paying prices. The only way is to try to share this land and to survive together. And let me tell you something. I recognize the historical rights of Jews in this land everywhere. But never in history they were alone here. There was always others, and these others are us. If we recognize this mutual history, we will be able to find the mutual future together. And we are capable, and we will. People like Ben-Gvir, I really hope that the Israelis will vote him away in the coming election. They will vote him out together with all the extreme people who are inside this government. Because this guy, he's not only trying to provoke Palestinians, but he is dividing the Israeli society. Do you think that this visit to the mosque today is uniting the Israelis behind him? He's more and more dividing the Israelis. He's a controversial person that, nobody is really able to accept him. And he thinks that by what he's doing, he's serving the national interest of the Israeli Jewish people. I think he's doing the opposite. But anyway, he does not represent the Israelis. And those extremes on the Palestinian side do not represent the Palestinians.
Well, I want to steer you back to that for a minute, Samar. Let's steer back to Palestinian leadership here, okay? Because President Abbas, who's been in power a long time, I know you're not a fan of his extended presidential term here, of course, but we've seen him taking action, or at least ordering his security forces into areas in the West Bank and Jenin in particular to sort of assert his authority in a way we haven't seen in a while. We're wondering what his plans are here. Is he looking at it a day after in Gaza? Is he planning on essentially taking over more along those lines? Are there people in the wing, in Fatah, who are ready to take over for him when and if he steps aside, passes away, he's an elderly man? What's next for his ruling party?
Well, I think he's counting his last days. And if I want a little bit to compare what's happened in Syria to what's happening here in the Palestinian areas. In Syria, Assad was a little bit nervous in the last nights and moments to find out the exit route. He took his way to a Russian base where he flew out to Russia. But for President Abbas, he does not live in Ramallah. He lives in Amman. So he doesn't need to worry about how to escape when things will collapse. Things are collapsing. We can see it. You don't need to be an expert to see it. Now, what will happen after Abbas? I think a more moderate Palestinian leadership will emerge because Palestinians are fed up from the current situation. They are fed up from the destruction that Hamas brought upon them in Gaza, and they are fed up by the corruption that Abbas brought upon them in the West Bank. Automatically, Palestinians will rally against leadership that will bring them the option of construction, or option of waking up every morning and being confident that today is going to be better. And it does not come as a gift from the sky. We need to work for it, to have our situation better, to live in a better situation, to develop ourselves economically, to build our democracy. We need to work on it. And I think I can see it among the young generation. I can see it among lots of activists inside Fatah. The change is coming, and I am confident this change. But if the Palestinians set an example in front of the Israelis that we are changing positively, that we are opening doors for cooperation, this will affect the Israeli public opinion into voting out extreme voices like Ben-Gvir. And then when the mainstreams, the normal Israelis and Palestinians, we start doing business, we will be able and capable to find a political horizon that will satisfy the both nations.
Well, I do appreciate the optimism, but of course the analysis. Summer, in all seriousness, I believe there's a lot to what you're saying there, and especially the issue that you began with on recognizing mutual rights to live here together side by side. These are important keys that are missing from so much of the discourse. Samar Senjalawi, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We do pivot more to Syria now, as we touched on, as protests. They broke out in the country following a circulation of a video showing an attack, some desecration on an important Alawite shrine in Aleppo. It's been a rallying war cry throughout the years of war there, triggering widespread demonstrations. Now, these protests are highlighting the reignited calls for social justice and equality that appear to reflect growing tensions within the country's newly forming political landscape. Take a look.
Protests erupted in Syria after a video of an attack on an Alawite shrine in Aleppo circulated online. While the demonstrations originated in the heartland of deposed Syrian ruler Bashar al-Assad's Alawite minority in the coastal cities of Tartus and Latakia, they soon spread.
We want all Syria to know that the Alawites in Kardaha are an essential part of this society and its fabric. We're not outsiders, we are the people of this area. We extend our hand to anyone who wants to build a new Syria free from injustice, discrimination, and inequality. We want social justice and the respect of people and their rights.
In the central city of Homs, a large crowd was seen fleeing gunfire. The source of that fire has not yet been identified. This comes just a day after hundreds protested in Damascus against the torching of a Christmas tree.
Our position is that of monitoring what may happen in order to judge if these factions that came, the HTS and the groups that are ruling now in Syria, are serious about creating a civil Syrian society where all its citizens have the opportunity to live freely, and especially its Christian citizens. So we are waiting.
Alongside the Alawite protest movement, 14 Syrian police officers were killed in an ambush by forces loyal to the ousted Assad government in the Tartus Governorate. Syria's new interior minister, Mohammed Abdulrahman, is vowing to, quote, crack down on anyone who dares to undermine Syria's security or endanger the lives of its citizens.
There is no need for the events that happened in Tartus, and the HTS must hit those who went out in protests with an iron fist. Why are they going out and causing all this chaos? By God's will, there will be no civil war. All those were remnants of the previous regime.
Syria's new Islamist rulers have sought to assure religious and ethnic minorities that their rights will be upheld. But until proven capable of doing so, these protests will just be the latest in the string of security challenges facing the new administration that came to power just 2 weeks ago.
Again, bring you back to our top of the hour story here. Again, as we are on air right now, the Israel Defense Force and Israeli Air Force are conducting strikes in Yemen, again, against what we know for now has been some targets at Sana's International Airport, and some other infrastructure and precision strikes taking place as well. We don't know a lot yet, but we know that these strikes have been taking place in the last couple hours. We also heard tough talk from the Houthi leaders recently in a recorded statement now released today that they're not standing down, that they're standing with Gaza, that they're standing against Israel. Again, this is, of course, codified in their flag and slogan here. But for more on this, we're joined by Inbal Nissim Louvetange, a lecturer at the Open University. Thanks for being with us here. The Houthis appear to be one of the great, I want to say, implacable regional foes of Israel at this point. I mean, if their flag and banner weren't enough of it here, I believe it's death to Israel, death to America, curse on the Jews, or something close to that, that this is printed on everything government official in their country. Look, what do you think the impact is of the strikes Israel's taking, of what's likely to be a ramped-up hardline position, hard power being deployed against the Houthis in Yemen? What's your take on the situation we're now in and where this appears to be going in the near term?
Well, I'll use the words of the anchor at the Al Arabiya network. They opened their broadcast by saying this is another hit from a routine that Israel and the Houthis have been establishing for the past few months. I don't know if it's another chapter in this routine, because we don't know yet the severity of the hits, but we know at least 25 different raids of Israeli army of aircraft, mainly on Al Hudaydah port and also on the international airport of the capital Sana'a. Probably the control tower was destroyed as well, maybe some of the airplanes. Oil facilities maybe were hit in Al Hudaydah. We're not sure still, but the Houthis are trying to say, business as usual. If you open their Al Masira channel, you will see that the speech of the leader, Abd al-Malik al-Houthi, is there as every Thursday. The whole 1 hour and almost 20 minutes of it, they recorded ahead, so they had no problem on broadcasting it and keeping it on the website. So on their part, it's business as usual. Even Hamad Ali al-Houthi, who said today that those hits will not change the attitude of the Houthis towards Israel. He was interviewed to Al Masira newspaper just a few days ago, and he said something like, Israelis would reach the sun before they can hit the Houthis or reach the Houthis.
Do you buy the tough talk? I mean, we've seen other groups in the region who are arguably much more powerful than the Houthis, Hezbollah in Lebanon, tying their fate to whatever was taking place in the Gaza Strip. We know that none of that has been lost on the Houthis. Do you believe what you hear from them, or are they going to go down in flames, essentially standing up for Gaza?
I think it's mainly for them, not for Gaza. I mean, it has to serve their own interests, first and foremost. And apparently the price they've paid so far was not severe enough to make them stop. So you have to assume that in a way it's serving them.
And serving them in terms of their patronage from Tehran or a local population. What do we know about what the locals, the people living on the Houthis, think about all this?
I think both. They had very bad. They didn't have much support in terms of the way they govern their territories, the economic and social situation. And so I think that when they decided that they're gonna save the people of Gaza, or become the ones that defend them, whereas other countries such as Egypt or Saudi Arabia are not doing much, they gained a lot of popularity, both inside Houthi territory and outside. Even their opposition will find it very hard to come against such a cause.
Do you think there's sense in what we're hearing from certain elements of the Israeli political echelon, defense establishment, that the real enemy, again, is not in Yemen, that we shouldn't be focused on Yemen, it should all be focused on Tehran, the cost should be exacted on Iran? Is there sense to that at this point?
If you assume that the Houthis are a classic, if you like, proxy of Iran, then probably this is what you should do. But I don't think so. If you look at the history of the Houthis, from the time they began fighting the central government in Sana'a with the former late President Ali Saleh, to about 2 decades, where they started from a small group up north in Saada, in the mountains of Yemen, and now it's practically a state of its own, if you like. Yeah. And they are waging war against Israel and the Red Sea. So they are pretty much independent in what they do. It is serving their interests in the first place, as we said. Of course, they are depending on Iranian help with weapon, with intelligence. And to a certain amount, they are connected to Iran, and they share common interests. But I wouldn't say that they do whatever Tehran is asking them to do.
Thank you very much for being with us. Nissim Louftan from Open University. There's lots to take in right now on this front, so appreciate your time in the program. And Dr. David Shimoni as well. Thanks for being with us, sitting through a lot of these conversations, contributing as well. Thank you again. A lot of news happening this hour. Again, that's where we began. That's where we end with you. Again, the Israeli Defense Force confirming strikes in Yemen this hour, reportedly including dozens of warplanes now, strategic targeting of specific infrastructure at the airport in Sana'a, at some of the ports. It's an open story. It's taking place as we speak, but we'll follow up on it. We'll have all the latest for you right here on I-24 News. For now, I'm David Matlin, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for joining.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video on Demand app.
You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary.
Whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video on Demand app today.
En nuestro próximo programa Luces sin Fronteras, una especial colaboración del Departamento de Emprendimientos Sionistas y I-24 News, haremos brillar la luz de Hanukkah entre Israel y el mundo hispano, resaltando la resiliencia del pueblo judío. Nos conectaremos con las comunidades judías latinoamericanas y mucho más. Un programa que brillará desde Israel al mundo. News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de I-24 News.